So our next speaker is Smitha Ari. She's a senior vice president, sustainable finance and ESG at Octus ESG India. Smitha is a finance professional with over 16 years of corporate and entrepreneurial experience, having worked across sustainable finance, ESG, corporate banking, impact investing, and investment banking. Our expertise lies in product structuring, financial analysis, and research in sectors such as financial services, clean energy, skilling and livelihood, and agriculture. At Octus ESG, Smitha takes care of projects, design, and development of financial products, research and partnership across sustainable finance, ESG, and climate strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome Sminta Ari our to the World Sustainability Conference.
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me. It is indeed a pleasure to be a part of this esteemed event. Professor Walsh spoke about an important pillar of sustainability, which is basically around education and skill enhancement. And I would like to touch upon today on the other important pillar, which is around financing of sustainability interventions across the world. So many recent developments in the world around resource usage, climate change, increasing income inequality, and business impacts on environment and society have propelled sustainability conversations, and all these are very pertinent for Africa, given its increasing vulnerability to climate impacts with land degradation, deforestation, biodiversity loss, water scarcity, and things like this. And despite contributing towards just a fraction of the global greenhouse gas emissions, Africa stands out disproportionately as one of the most vulnerable regions across the world. So it was amply clear, given that the implications of a business as usual scenario is quite grave. Estimates, in fact, suggest that Africa is losing about 5 to 15% of its GDP per capita growth and needs about $1.6 trillion between 2022 and 2030 to meet its NDCs, or nationally determined contributions. So, in light of this, accelerating climate policies and mobilizing financial solutions is the only way ahead. A significant ramp up in sustainable finance would offer immense opportunities to deliver on both climate and development goals, while leapfrogging to better forms of growth. So, in order to, can I have the previous slide, please? Yeah. In order to stabilize climate change, carbon emissions need to fall. And not just carbon, even methane, for instance, the other greenhouse gas emissions need to be contained. And we can see that majority of countries have indicated net zero targets. So of the 192 countries who have signed the UNFCCC, about 139 countries have now set or considering to set a target to reduce their emissions to net zero. And one must realize that these targets by countries will have a cascading effect on businesses, companies, and financial institutions as well. So, if you look at South Africa, for instance, following the cabinet's goal of net zero by 2050, which was announced in 2020, DBSA, which is the Development Bank of South Africa, committed to go to net zero by 2050 at COP26. Standard Bank also announced in March 2022 to get to net zero. Further, PPC Limited, which is South Africa's biggest cement maker, so the non-financial space, has also, looked at these aspects. The Green Building Council South Africa has launched its net zero building certification to reward projects for being net zero water, waste, and ecology. So while these developments are encouraging, the challenge for developing countries and emerging markets is their dependency on coal. And with a short window of opportunity, the prospects to develop first in a high carbon intensive way and then clean up and decarbonize later is quite little. Further support is required for LDCs, and frontier markets so that they can also develop a resilient infrastructure. So COP27, which is currently happening in Egypt, calls for greater leadership and renewed international support to encourage adaptation efforts. So support and investments are needed now, and not later, to slow a changing climate and ensure a just transition. Can I have the slides, please, on the screen? So from net zero, I want to move on to financing the net zero commitment. So in order to achieve the global net zero target and to finance Africa's quest towards a just and climate resilient future, from various domestic and international sources, two approaches can be identified. First is greening of finance, which is translating to greener, adaptive, and resilient financial systems, which is the backbone of any nation working towards the betterment of its people. So, a green financial system integrates climate related risks into their internal assessment frameworks and methodologies to account for added risks posed by climate change. The second approach is financing of green. So, this is more inclined towards the opportunities presented by projects with sustainable development priorities. So, this entails encouraging capital infusion through various private, public, and other sources, into green projects. So in this presentation, I would like to focus on the second approach, and will try to give a perspective on different innovative green financing mechanisms with examples from Africa and other emerging markets. Next slide, please. Yeah, this slide. All right. So now that we have established that financial resources are central to meaningful climate action, it is important to understand the world of sustainable finance. So there are different definitions that are used across the world for finance deployed with environment or social impacts at its core. So you can see on the screen, the European Commission calls it differently. The OECD defines it in a different manner, and so you can also see that climate finance is a subset of green finance, which itself is a subset of sustainable finance. Climate finance provides funds for addressing climate change adaptation and mitigation, and green finance has a broader scope that also covers other environmental goals. Now, it is important to note that there is no universal definition of sustainable finance or its many types. So, thus far, financial institutions, governments, and international organizations have tended to create definitions according to their underlying motivations. And this has resulted in a proliferation of heterogeneous terminology, and one of the major challenges which hinders growth. Next slide, please. So, one very good example of a sustainable finance product is green bonds. Now, green bonds are proving to be popular financing instruments that are enhancing the product basket, and delivering a price advantage. So basically, this is a fixed income financial instrument for raising capital through the debt market to fund only green projects or assets. Now, with green projects on the right hand side and green investors on the left, a green bond can be issued by any type of institution, such as banks or companies, governments. And these bonds are certified as green by independent verifiers and certifiers, like Climate Bonds Initiative, for example, to avoid the risk of greenwashing and to attract investors with similar risk appetite. ICMA provides four principles which must be followed for a bond to be green, in order to have enhanced impact. So the use of proceeds, for example, identifies the eligibility criteria, which could be satisfied for green projects. Project evaluation and selection elaborates on the internal process to select the eligible green project. Management of proceeds explains the measures to be put in place to track the allocation of proceeds and also the temporary use of funds. And finally, reporting is very important, and this talks about the annual or periodic reporting, both impact related as well as the financing related. Now, this whole process is subject to external reviews in the form of second party opinions at various stages. And these bonds provide investors with the ability to finance projects which are, core to the E of ESG, or the environment aspect. Next slide, please. Now, while we saw that this is all very nice, there are a lot of challenges. It's not that simple, right? Now, for instance, the lack of uniform definitions and standardization contributes to minimal understanding of these products, and also different interpretation, like how we saw in the definition slide. Another challenge is the lack of verifiable data for impact measurement and monitoring and evaluation. And this is probably the biggest challenge. So, there have been a lot of players who have come into the market to offer these services, but reliability of data collection mechanisms is still an issue. Lack of dedicated green capital in emerging markets is also an important challenge, which prevents the cash flow towards these projects. And there are also other challenges like capacities, for example, which Professor Walsh touched upon in the earlier presentation, which is very critical, for in terms of skills within financial institutions as well as corporates on how they look at these issues. The sustainable finance as a concept, sustainable finance flows are heavily skewed in favor of select sectors and select sizes, for example, clean energy, green buildings, e-mobility. These are the markets, or these are the sectors, which are more attractive to investors. However, there are a lot of other potential areas like water, sustainable agriculture, or waste management, for example. And challenges around size as well as transaction costs are important challenges to direct flows towards these sectors. Next slide, please. So now let's look at some of the mechanisms basically that have been developed in emerging markets like South Africa, Nigeria, or India for that matter, to advance sustainable finance. Next slide, please. So I just want to start off on outcome based financing. So as you can see on the screen, outcome based financing focuses on driving substantial results and incentivizes favorable outcomes by providing positive return on investments. So, for example, just to talk about the structure, an investor provides working capital or initial investment to a service provider, which will in turn deliver the intervention required to bring about the sustainability or the change, so to say. Governments, multilateral agencies, or philanthropies act as outcome funders, and the disbursement of the outcome funding is triggered after the results are verified by a third party, an independent verification agent. And this carries substantial returns so that the service provider is compensated, and simultaneously the investor makes its returns with low risk. Now, I just want to give in some examples of outcome based financing products. Let's start off with development impact bonds. Now, this has a similar structure to what I just spoke about, and the aim of development impact bonds is to attract private investors to subsidize the development projects. An interesting example of this is the Utkrisht DIB, which focus on it's an India-based DIB, which focuses on improving the quality of care among private maternity care providers. So the DIB was designed such that the investor provides the working capital to invest in health infrastructure, so that service providers can begin their work with private healthcare facilities. An independent verifier was there to verify the results, and post which the outcome payers who was USAID and Merck, Merck from others, would pay the investor the original amount which was invested and an additional return. So this whole bond DIB supported about 440 small healthcare organization, to improve their services and meet the standards. One more example is Village Enterprises DIB from Africa, which was issued in in Kenya and Uganda, and provided and funded a program called Graduation Out of Poverty, run by the NGO Village Enterprise. So it enabled more than about 14,000 first-time entrepreneurs in Kenya and Uganda to start small businesses and form business savings groups. And based on the increase in consumption and spending of around 6%, Data estimates that the program would generate a lifetime impact of about $21 million. So that's on DIB. Moving on quickly to the next product, which is sustainability linked loans. Uh, these are loans basically where the terms of the loan is revised in accordance with the achievement of the underlying KPIs, the key performance indicators, and that is decided at disbursement stage. And positive results would mean favorable loan terms, lower interest, and longer tenures. A good example is the 8.45 billion rand debt package announced by Rand Merchant Bank, which is the first syndicated loan by an African bank. And the package actually supports Mediclinic Southern Africa, which operates a range of multidisciplinary acute care private hospitals focused on South Africa and Namibia. Next, the pay-as-you-go models, deployed by businesses like Mcopa and Azuri Solar Technology, where products and services like, televisions, refrigerators, or smartphones is provided to underbanked customers on a daily micropayments. Next slide, please. So, financing for cash flow or livelihood creation. Uh, this mechanism is focused on sustainable development of Africa, in terms of improving cash flows and livelihood creations. The approach is to support small businesses, women, youth-led businesses, financial inclusions, and also supporting SMEs. So, just a couple of examples here on some financial products. So, Solar Sister project from as you can see on the screen, launched in Uganda. The aim was basically to train women entrepreneurs to deliver clean energy to the last mile. And this has reached more than about 3 million people, selling around 700,000 products in 3 countries, with over 8,000 women entrepreneurs, till 2022. Next, I would talk about Cocoa Climate Resilient Fund, which aims to basically accelerate climate adaptation measures for small cocoa farmers and SMEs in West Africa. And the estimated investment need for climate resilient cocoa agriculture in Ghana alone was at about 500 to 800 million dollars. And to achieve this target, the fund combines a technical assistance facility as well, and de-risking the facility. Finally, Kilicaf in Tanzania offers value chain based financing solutions involving small coffee holders, the smallholder farmers and buyers, with guarantee funds, warehouse receipts, marketing agreements, all in the structure. Uh, a couple of global examples I wanted to talk about. One was on women livelihood bonds, developed by the Impact Investment Exchange, which enables individual women entrepreneurs in sectors like food processing, agriculture, etc. And till 2022, the livelihood bond had mobilized about $78 million and is empowering about 1 million women across the Asia Pacific region. Another example from India was the Skill Development Bond, which was developed by India's Skill Development Council, and it aims to support about 50,000 young people over 4 years, and about 60% of whom will be women and girls. So as you can see, there are different models, different kinds of instruments which can be introduced towards cash flow based funding. Next, on blended finance, so this poses a significant opportunity for financial institutions to facilitate socioeconomic development within the risk return paradigm. So it's a structuring approach basically, where resources are maximized in terms of mobilizing private capital and also mitigating risk for investors. So, a couple of examples on this would be the Lake Turkana Wind Power Facility in Kenya, as well as the West African Initiative for Climate Smart Agriculture. So, these are very innovative financing models which have been developed to kind of blend in private capital as well as public capital, and also reduce the risks posed by the whole structure itself. Can I have the slide throw back, please? I just wanted to highlight one case study by Octus ESG, which we did in Zimbabwe. And I'm not able to see the slides, please. Yeah, the next slide. Yeah, this slide, please. Thank you. Okay. So Zimbabwe faces an acute energy crisis, right? So with low electricity penetration, disproportionately impacting women and youth, and the lack of financing and conducive investment terms, for renewable energy projects continue to be there. So access to capital from commercial banks is also a challenge. So the whole structure was created such that these different pockets of challenges can be addressed. So Octus ESG actually designed a replicable and a scalable gender responsive renewable energy fund under a project by three UN agencies and the Zimbabwe counterparts. And the primarily it was an equity fund which was structured to leverage UN SDG fund to catalyze private capital into clean energy and also strengthen livelihood security by creating business opportunities. So this was a $45 million US fund, which follows a classic private equity structure. And the UN SDG fund was the anchor investor, and other financial institutions like Old Mutual and IDBZ were limited partners. The equity structure is further supported by debt investments from institutions like CAPS, and there were innovative structures like credit enhancements which were built in to de-risk the debt investments. The fund also combines a technical assistance facility in order to provide the project developers with capacity building around aspects like project management, financial accounting, and bookkeeping. So the Renewable Energy Fund is in line with Zimbabwe's revised NDCs and has been awarded a $10 million capital by the UN SDG Fund. Next slide, please. Yeah. So, talking about sovereign green bonds, which is the last of the structures, so the mechanisms discussed earlier were more from a financial institution perspective. So now looking at fundraising or financing mechanisms at a country level, African governments have been focusing on opportunities in the local capital markets and also exploring alternative source of funding, like access to international capital. Now, sovereign green bonds are issued by central governments in order to attract international capital for funding green projects in the country. So, a sovereign green bond framework is usually formulated to describe the use and management of proceeds, similar to the green bond framework I spoke about earlier, and they help a country at a country level to move on to low carbon pathways. And as the capital is backed by the government, the credit profile of the projects also, are kind of improved. So about till this year, 2022, about 26 countries across the globe have issued sovereign green bonds, and Nigeria has become the first government in the African continent to issue certified sovereign green bonds. So the just to talk a little bit about this, the 5 year, $29.7 million bond was issued in December 2017, primarily for solar and forest related projects. And the tranche is the first of the $420 million program, and the bonds were issued on the backdrop of growing awareness towards these financing mechanisms, as developing and developed countries are trying to align their domestic financial and capital markets with sustainable development outcomes. So just wanted to conclude today's discussion, and I would like to reiterate that the importance of sustainable finance and developing innovative mechanisms to incentivize stakeholders at every level. So this will not only help in advancing the agenda of climate action in Africa, but also create a conducive environment for financiers, for future investments. I would like to stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. But we have a question from the audience, and the question is, what is Octa's ESG doing to accelerate global sustainable finance and climate transition?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So, Octus ESG works across, both the risks and opportunity side of ESG and climate risks. And we work very closely with international governments, with multilaterals, bilateral organizations to look at how we can come into this transition. So, on the opportunity side, in fact, we look at how we can design sustainable finance frameworks, frameworks for organizations to bring out green bonds, social bonds, or sustainability bonds, and identify investors and markets where this can be done. On the risk side, we look at how financial institutions integrate ESG and climate risks into their lending portfolios, for example. How disclosures can be enhanced, non-financial disclosures can be enhanced. How investors can get that confidence that the particular organization is actually looking at sustainability and not looking at greenwashing. In fact, even for sectors other than financial services like agriculture or renewable energy, we look at those innovative financing products and solutions which can be stitched together across different stakeholders, and looked at how this can help in raising the financing component of it. And I just
Uh,
wanted to add that while we are based in India, our focus is on emerging markets in Asia and Africa.
Thank you very much for being on the World Sustainability Conference today.
Sure.
Due to our time, we will only be allowed to take one question. Thank you very much. And I'm going to put in your contacts for people in the audience that would like to contact you. Um,
Sure.
so, give me 1 second. All right. So please feel free to email our speaker at or follow the wonderful work they're doing on um, www.octusesg.com, and they can be followed online at Twitter and LinkedIn at Octus ESG, and on LinkedIn
Yeah.
the link is on the page. Thank you so much for coming, and we really enjoyed your presentation, and we hope that we
Sure.
collaborate with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.